A cold night at Danvers. It was 2006, and I was in my second year at Salem State University. It had recently been announced that the nearby Danvers State Hospital had been sold and was going to be torn down so apartments could be built there. I'd heard the legends of Danvers since I arrived on campus a year earlier. It was built in the 1870s as a mental hospital with numerous buildings and a tunnel system connecting them all. Over the next century, depending on who you believe, it was home to lobotomies, shock therapy, and God knows what else. Since it closed in the 1990s, reports of hauntings have become prevalent. It was even used in a horror movie a few years before we started college. My friends and I were big into horror movies, so this was like a chance to step foot into one. The thought of breaking into an abandoned asylum had us more excited than any frat party. And with Danvers in line to be demolished, we figured we had to go before it was too late. So one frigid January night, we decided to go for it. There were 5 of us: me, Eric, Sam, Ben, and Jake. Each of us trying to act cool, even though none of us knew exactly what we were getting ourselves into. The moment we crossed through the rusted gates, there was a strange stillness. The wind was quiet, and the air felt thick. Danvers was a massive, sprawling campus, and we spent the first hour sneaking through the overgrown paths, making sure no one could hear us or see us from the street. The main building, known as the Kirkbride Building, was a large Gothic structure, tall, decaying, and covered in ivy. The windows were shattered or boarded up, and the doors hung loosely on their hinges. We heard stories about how the asylum had once housed more than 1,000 patients, but when we stepped inside, it felt like we were intruding on something far worse than history. As we walked down the dark, narrow hallways, the first thing we noticed were the sounds. Faint at first, like a soft rustling in the distance, but then a scream. A long, tortured scream that echoed off the walls, making my blood run cold. Jake, the bravest of us, or maybe just the dumbest, whispered, "Did you guys hear that?" We all froze. Eric's face turned pale. "Maybe it was just the wind," Ben said, his voice shaky. But none of us believed that. The air felt wrong, like it was heavy with something that shouldn't be there. The sounds grew louder, too. Faint banging noises followed by more screams, this time closer and more desperate. We all exchanged uneasy glances. "This is intense," Sam said. There was something in his voice that made me hesitate. He actually didn't seem scared. He seemed captivated. We pushed forward, our flashlights flickering in the darkness. Shadows moved across the walls, slow and deliberate. They weren't cast by anything we could see. It was like they had a mind of their own, creeping along the hallway, following our every step. "What the hell is that?" Ben muttered, his voice trembling. "Maybe just some weird stuff from the fire damage," Eric said, but I could tell he didn't believe it. We all felt it, the hairs on the back of our necks standing up, the unease that grew with every passing second. We rounded a corner and saw the entrance to a dark tunnel, one of the old service tunnels that connected different parts of the campus. We stood there for a moment, silently debating whether we should go down it. Jake, of course, was the first to speak up. "Let's check it out." I guess none of us had the guts to argue, so we followed him into the pitch-black tunnel. The air grew colder with every step, and the walls were slick with mold. The sound of our footsteps echoed, but then there was something else. Another scream, a gut-wrenching scream, so loud and piercing that I thought my ears would burst. It felt like it was coming from inside my own skull. "That's it," Sam said, his voice barely audible. "I'm done." Before any of us could respond, there was a loud crash, something heavy slamming against the tunnel's walls. We all jumped back, panic setting in. In a split second, we turned and ran. My heart thundered in my chest as we sprinted back out of the tunnel and into the main building, the sound of something chasing us, growing closer with every step. We stumbled outside, gasping for breath, but didn't stop there. As we caught our bearings, we found ourselves in one of the old cemeteries on the property, headstones scattered across the overgrown field. That's when Jake stopped dead in his tracks. I see someone," he said, his voice strained. We turned to where he was looking. but there was no one there, just the wind moving through the trees. "You're imagining things," I said, but I wasn't so sure. The air had gone icy, like someone had flipped a switch. I could feel it, cold creeping up my spine like a presence that wasn't supposed to be there. Jake's eyes were wide with fear. No, I swear, someone's standing right there. I couldn't see anything, but my skin crawled. If Jake was that scared, I didn't need any more convincing. We didn't wait to see if anyone was really there, living or otherwise. We ran back to Eric's car and piled inside. Eric tore off and didn't stop until we were back on campus, hearts racing, but our minds racing faster. None of us even so much as mentioned that night for months, and to this day, we never joke about it. It's the kind of thing that sticks with you, that makes you wonder if we were really alone in that place, or if something else, something far worse, was there with us. As for Danvers, well, demolition started not long after our visit, and apartment buildings started being built on the land. Less than a year later, though, several of those new buildings and some of the construction trailers burned in an enormous fire. It made us all wonder if something sinister was at play. It's been nearly 20 years now, but sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I still hear those screams. And I swear I see those black shadows moving just out of the corner of my eye. I don't know what we saw that night, but I know one thing for sure. Some things should just be left alone. The Byberry Asylum. I'm an urban explorer from New Jersey, always searching for abandoned places with a dark history. My friend Evan and I had our eyes set on something that had been on my list for years. The Byberry Asylum in Philadelphia. You've probably heard of it. The place has been closed since 1990, but the stories still haunt the city. I had read about the horrors that went on there. Abuse, neglect, and worse. Since it closed, there have been rumors of satanic cults and paranormal activity. It was the kind of place that gets under your skin, and I couldn't resist. We decided to go late at night, hoping the coast would be clear. Byberry's been a popular spot for thrill seekers and vagrants, so we knew to keep our distance and stay cautious. As we came near the abandoned grounds, the looming structure appeared in the distance. Its cracked windows and broken doors, a chilling reminder of its troubled past. We waited in the car for a while, just watching. The moon was barely visible behind thick clouds, and a gust of wind blew through the trees. The air felt heavy, unnatural. It was as if the place was holding its breath, daring us to enter. "Let's go," I said finally, pushing open the car door. The sounds of the city were a distant hum, swallowed up by the isolation of the asylum. As we walked towards the entrance, I couldn't help but feel like we were being watched. The silence around us was thick, oppressive. Byberry was known for its brutality. Patients chained to walls, beaten, starved, and worse. I'd heard stories of patients dying under mysterious circumstances, their deaths swept under the rug. And now the building seemed to wear its scars, its walls cracked and weathered, but still holding on to something dark. We made our way inside, the creaking of the old building echoing in the still night. The air inside was colder than I expected, a sharp contrast to the warmth outside. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating strange symbols on the walls, pentagrams and strange markings that I couldn't make out. "You ever hear the stories about satanic cults using this place?" I whispered to Evan. "Yeah, I've heard that," he said. "I always figured they were just stories." We moved deeper into the asylum, our footsteps muffled by the rotting floorboards. It was then that we started hearing it. A faint moaning, almost like a whisper, carried on the wind. Then louder, screams followed by loud bangs on the walls. I froze. Evan grabbed my arm. What the hell was that? I didn't answer. My heart pounded, but we kept moving. The further we went, the colder it got. My breath fogged up in front of me. It wasn't just the temperature. It was something else, something in the air that seemed alive. In the distance, we heard a growl. It was low, guttural, coming from up ahead of us. I wanted to check out the catacombs beneath the building, but something about the place was starting to feel wrong. I could see the doubt in Evan's eyes, too. "Let's head this way," I suggested, pointing toward a dark corridor ahead. We moved slowly, the beam of our flashlight shaking as we made our way into the gloom. Suddenly, Evan stopped dead in his tracks. "What is that?" Up ahead, floating in the air, were two white orbs. They weren't lights, they were just too smooth, too unnatural. They hung in the air, suspended, watching us. Part of me wanted to leave right then, but I couldn't take my eyes off the orbs. My skin crawled, and I felt like something was following us, even though I didn't see anything. My breath caught in my throat, and then it happened. A blood-curdling scream split the silence, making both of us jump. Evan grabbed my arm again, his face pale as we turned to see a glowing blur floating toward us. It wasn't a person, at least not in any way I understood. It was long, a formless shape, glowing blue-white, flickering like a ghost. It didn't have a face, or arms, or legs. It was just there, moving toward us. Before I could react, it turned, slipping through a closed door like it was nothing. "Let's go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But then, from the other end of the corridor, there was a loud bang. We spun around, flashing our lights toward the sound. An instant later, someone came stumbling out of a room up ahead. My heart stopped. This clearly wasn't a ghost. It was a man, alive. His eyes were wild. The beam of my flashlight glinted off something metal in his hand, a knife. He screamed something unintelligible, his voice filled with anger. I didn't want to hear more. We ran. We sprinted down the hall, not once looking back, until we burst out the front door and into the street. We hurried into my car and took off. Neither of us said a word, but I could feel it. We both knew we'd just barely escaped something far darker than we ever imagined. I still enjoy urban exploration, but I've crossed haunted asylums off my list going forward. The Shadows of Pennhurst. Uncle Rob was the fun uncle when I was a kid. He was my mom's youngest brother. He let us watch horror movies when we were at his house, and even took me to my first rock concert. As a kid, I didn't realize it had taken him a little longer than some to figure out exactly who he was. After high school, he joined the Army, served for 4 years, and then bounced around from job to job. Nothing really stuck for him until the mid-'80s, when he landed a position as an orderly at the Pennhurst State School and Hospital in Pennsylvania. He worked there until it shut down in 1987. This was all before I was born, and it was something he never mentioned to me or my brother until earlier this year. We lost Uncle Rob last month. He was only 60 years old. But shortly before he passed, he told me and my brother all about his time at Pennhurst. I'm not sure if he wanted to get it all out before he died, or if he figured it was one last scary story to tell his nephews. Pennhurst had a dark history. It was originally designed in the early 1900s to house and segregate the so-called feeble-minded, people with disabilities or mental health issues. The idea was to keep them out of sight, away from the general public. What it turned into, however, was something much worse. By the time Rob started working there, the place was a nightmare. Decades of neglect, abuse, and overcrowding had turned the asylum into something unrecognizable. It was violent, filthy, and understaffed. And the patients? They were treated as little more than animals. Rob said the staff would beat them, kick them, drug them into submission, and even make them fight each other for sport. It was a living hell for everyone trapped inside. But Rob said the monsters on staff were rivaled by the horrors he encountered while working night shifts. He said he didn't believe in ghosts before he took that job, but that after working there, he couldn't deny what he experienced. Doors slamming on their own, disembodied footsteps stalking him in the dark, voices echoing through empty corridors in the dead of night. None of it made any sense, but he swore it all happened. He told us this one story that made him believe in the paranormal without question. About 6 months into working there, he was taking a smoke break outside, trying to get some air and clear his head. It was late, probably after midnight, when he saw a little girl, 5 or 6 years old, walking across the campus alone. She was wandering like she was lost, looking around as if she didn't know where she was. Now, Rob said Pennhurst did have child patients, but they certainly weren't supposed to wander the grounds alone, never mind in the middle of the night. Rob knew something wasn't right, so he approached her, hoping to help before one of the less compassionate staff members saw her and did God knows what. He called to the little girl. She turned toward him, but didn't answer. He said she walked towards him, and when she got close, she didn't stop. Instead, she walked right through him. It wasn't just cold, Rob said. It was like everything inside me froze for a moment, like my heart stopped, my lungs stopped working, and then she was gone. Just gone, like she had never been there. It sounded unbelievable, but even all these years later, Uncle Rob still seemed terrified telling us that story. The little girl wasn't the only thing Rob saw either. He said there were other spirits, other children, their voices echoing in the dark. He'd often hear the sounds of them laughing or playing in the halls late at night. But then there were never any children there, just empty abandoned rooms and long dark corridors. Sometimes he'd be walking down a hall alone and he'd hear tiny footsteps behind him, but when he turned around, there was nothing. Nothing but the smell of old, stale air and the hum of the fluorescent lights above. The boiler room, he said, was its own private terror. There was someone or something there that he referred to as the king. He said he only went to the boiler room once, and then flat out refused to ever go back. I asked what happened, and he just shook his head. Even more than 30 years later, he wouldn't talk about it. By the time Pennhurst shut its doors for good, Rob was relieved. He said the weird happenings were common knowledge among the staff, but he never really talked with any of his coworkers about it. Between the hauntings and the real-life horrors performed by the staff, Uncle Rob said he wasn't sure how much longer he could have stayed there anyway. He could feel his sanity starting to slip. But the job did have a silver lining. It inspired Uncle Rob to go back to school and get his nursing license. And that was the career he had until he was too sick to keep doing it. These days, the asylum is a popular site for ghost tours. People come from all over, eager to see the place for themselves, to hear the stories, to experience the hauntings firsthand. But after hearing Uncle Rob talk about it, I don't think I could ever bring myself to visit. Uncle Rob always seemed happy, like a big kid, so I like to think he found peace after leaving that place. But the look on his face when he told us those stories made it clear he was still carrying the horrors with him 3 decades later. There's a part of me that hopes those spirits are still wandering what's left of Pennhurst, reminding everyone of the horrors that happened there, because some atrocities should never be forgotten. Rest in peace, Uncle Rob. Thanks for listening, friends. If you've enjoyed these allegedly true haunted asylum stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time with more whispers from the pines.